Hey, what's up, everybody? I hope you are well. Coming here from my backyard, feeling good today. We had our first real cold front come through here, and when that happens, it just kind of invigorates you, and we're able to open the windows in the house. So I figured I'd come here to my back porch and do part two of my book on the language of creation, cosmic symbolism, and Genesis. And we did part one, salvaging creation from the scientific worldview, and then part two was heaven and earth in biblical cosmology. Read through some of the chapters and did some analysis, and kind of do the same thing and pick up where we left off here in part three, which is the main thrust of the book. It's got probably 15 or so chapters in it, and it's entitled, again, Heaven and Earth on the Human Scale. And here we're going to get into, right off the bat, of the idea of man being mediator between heaven and earth. So before we get started, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I appreciate you guys for listening in and engaging. And I want to start doing some interviews in 2021. So if you guys have any people that you'd like to see interviewed, I feel that I would be a good interviewer, even though I haven't really done them in terms of asking questions. So we'll see if that will come into fruition. I'll probably be doing one or two a month, depending on the time. And I'm very, interested on what you guys think would be some good people to interview. I actually will be interviewing Andrew McLuhan, Marshall McLuhan's grandson, here in early 2021, which I'm excited about. Let me know what you guys think. All right, chapter 14, first chapter in part 3 is entitled Humanity in the Image of God. It's a short 2-page chapter, so I'm going to kind of read it in its entirety, and it's going to go ahead and set us up for this part of the book. At the beginning here, we have a quote from Scripture. God created the human in his image. In the image of God, he created him. And here's a commentary. As will be discovered in this section, the narrative of creation also provides significant insights about the role of humanity in the universe. Most importantly, according to biblical cosmology, the function of human beings is to act as a mediator between heaven and earth for the knowledge of God within creation. In this context, the notion that Adam is, quote, in the image of God, close quote, means that humanity is a symbol of the Creator within creation. Thus, Adam is the embodiment of divine knowledge in the world. Unlike regular knowledge, which involves the union of spirit and matter for created things, this type of knowledge transcends itself into a form of metacognition. The following diagram represents the ultimate pattern of interpretation in the Bible. Although it is similar to the patterns discussed in the previous section, this structure involves an infinitely higher level. And here is the pattern. Here is the symbol and the diagram. The structure involves an infinitely higher level, the knowledge of God in creation. This overarching symbolism and Adam's general role as mediator between heaven and earth will be discussed in detail throughout this section. So that's the end of the chapter. It just sets us up nicely here, and think about this idea of man as mediator between heaven and earth, what that means for our role as a citizen, as a father, a mother, our role as stewards of this earth. And, the story of Adam naming the animals and ideas of humans having dominion over the earth have been taken as a kind of presupposing of the patriarchy, right? And that what needs to be overturned and what needs to be getting rid of is this idea that, human beings are special in any way. We're just advanced primates, and that thinking that we're special has caused a lot of the disorder and destruction of the environment and of animal populations, and that we need to get rid of this kind of fundamental idea of man being mediator. And I think this is completely wrong. While I do think that there has been and there is continuing to be massive destruction caused by human beings and caused by this idea of being rulers over the earth, but the problem, the solution is in the problem, right? The solution is in humanity's ability to mediate between heaven and earth, and to do it appropriately, and to do it with the grace of God, and to do it through a relationship with self, other, and community is the solution. And the solution is found in these ideas, I think. I really do feel deeply. So just to get this information out there and get people talking and thinking about these ideas that have been either been ridiculed or been made obsolete by our obsession with scientific materialist philosophies and whatnot. Our next chapter is entitled Adam as Microcosm, the Breath and the Body. Sorry, my dog is here too. You might hear him barking. And a quote from Scripture again. God formed the human from the dust of the ground, earth, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, heaven. It's the quote from Scripture. I've seen this said elsewhere, and it stuck with me, the idea that God formed the human from dust of the ground, right? So dust can also mean kind of spiritual light. It can mean particulates like matter and the food that we eat, right? We literally gather the food that we eat into our body, and then our body, mediates the consumption of the food and turns it into, energy, and it turns it into really our body and our identity. So this gathering process is constantly happening. And even if you zoom out a bit and you think of evolution as this kind of gathering of biological processes, and then this idea that God breathed the spirit of life into Adam, right? So Adam means both singular Adam, and Adam means humanity in Hebrew, right? So it's this one and the interplay between the one and the multiple that is constantly going on and interesting to think about. So again, we're looking at the interplay of heaven and earth through man as the mediator. And the commentary begins, in the story of the Garden of Eden, humanity is described as a microcosm of creation. Thus, Adam is created by joining a body from the earth and a breath from heaven. Here's a picture of the human microcosm illustrated here. As illustrated here, the soul and body of Adam may simply be interpreted as instances of heaven and earth at the level of human experience. Accordingly, the word spirit simultaneously refers to the wind of heaven and the breath of living creatures. These are one and the same in biblical cosmology. The primary role of Adam in this context is to act as a mediator between heaven and earth for the union of spirit and matter in creation. Moreover, this union defines Adam completely, not just at the moment of creation, but through his entire life. In other words, not only was Adam made by joining dust and breath, but this is also the impetus of everything else he does. Again, think about Adam on an individual level, and then also obviously as humanity as a whole. At a basic level, human life consists of breathing and nutrition. The first is when heaven's air is translated into Adam's breath, and the second is when the earth's soil is translated into Adam's flesh. In this manner, the cosmic union of heaven and earth is reflected at human levels. Thus, by simply staying alive, Adam is contributing to the greater goal of creation. Conversely, if Adam dies, a part of corporeal reality loses its higher spiritual purpose, and a part of spiritual reality loses its lower corporeal expression. For humans, it is also important to remember that breathing involves the ability to speak, which makes it a vehicle of language and information. Thus, in the human microcosm, Adam's head represents the first principle, wisdom. It's a footnote. In Hebrew, the word head implies first principle, a meaning that is also implied in the English words head, captain, and chief, as the source of meaning for the body. The role of the head is to provide a unifying principle to answer the dark, subconscious enigmas of the flesh. In exchange, the body expresses and supports the head with the actions of the arms and legs. On the whole, Adam's existence is centered on knowledge, which refers to the union of heaven, spirit, and earth body. Therefore, humanity's impetus in the universe can adequately be summed up as, quote, informing matter with meaning and expressing meaning with matter, close quote. This extremely simple formula surprisingly encompasses all human activity, including reproduction, technology, government, and science. These are all instances of joining matter with meaning. Let me read that again, it was important here. Therefore, humanity's impetus in the universe can adequately be summed up as, right, so here's the question that's being answered here. What is ours to do? What is humanity's role on Earth in this planet? Informing matter with meaning and expressing meaning with matter. This extremely simple formula surprisingly encompasses all human activity, including reproduction, technology, government, and science. These are all instances of joining matter with meaning. All right, chapter 16 is entitled Example, Manna and Flesh. And here we're going to really get into the qualities of the nature of heaven and earth and the movement, the descending nature of heaven, right, and the ascending nature of earth. And the example that's going to be used here is lowering seed and raising flesh. And it's going to be important to set up the rest of this chapter of these two patterns, ascending and descending. And we're going to, the example here is going to be of manna from heaven. When the children of Israel left Egypt and they were in the wilderness, they were sustained by heavenly bread, by manna from on high, and from quail, which was raised from below. And it's interesting to explore these patterns here. So the quote from Scripture, God will give you flesh in the evening to eat and bread in the morning to the full. The example provided in this chapter is a particularly clear case of the interaction between heaven and earth. It unmistakably depicts the dual influence of heaven and earth in the form of manna and the quails during Israel's exodus. It also provides some important examples of interactions between the macrocosm and the microcosm, where the influences of heaven and earth are translated into human experiences. Here's a long quote from Exodus 16 and Numbers 11. So children of Israel say, wouldn't it have been better for us to die in Egypt as we sat by the flesh pots and ate bread to the full? Have you brought us to this wilderness to kill us with hunger? And God responds, I will rain bread from heaven, and the people will gather it every day to test whether or not they will follow my law. They will eat flesh in the evening and be filled with bread in the morning, and they shall know that I am the Lord their God. At evening the quails ascended and covered the camp. When the dew descended on the camp during the night, the manna descended upon it. In the morning there was a fine bareness like frost on the surface of the earth. When the children of Israel saw it, they said to each other, what is it? And they called it manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and tasted like wafers and honey, and its appearance was like crystal. The people gathered it, and they ground it and made cakes with it. Here's the commentary. In the previous passage, manna and quails are depicted as descending and ascending respectively, and they are also referred to as seeds and flesh. These two types of food represent the influences of heaven and earth in this narrative. On one end, manna is not a typical food, but a spiritual nutrition. Its primary purpose is not to sustain the body, but to inform the soul. Manna is compared to seeds in this narrative because seeds represent spiritual principles in biblical cosmology. These points of wisdom were considered to be full of implicit light, concentrated information, which is why manna is described as bright, clear, and light, and why it is associated with the first light of the morning. These heavenly principles are high in meaning and low in corporeality, like they are point-like materialization of divine language, as clearly stated below. As footnote, manna means quote-unquote what, which is similar to the quiddity of Western philosophy. Also makes me think of qualia, the term in philosophy of mind, qualia, which is like the quality of existence, the felt experience of the color red. And like a seed, manna embodies the simple essence of phenomena. Back to the text here. Quote from Deuteronomy 8:3. God fed you with manna to teach you that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And here we go with the analysis here. On the other end, the quails are called flesh or meat, which refers to regular food in the sense of matter to sustain the body. They are depicted as ascending in the evening because they are akin to material obscurity. In general, flesh represents the counterpart of seed in the process of knowledge. Its role, like the earth's soil, is to detail or flesh out the implicit meaning of the seed. It is the cause of manifestation because it makes the implicit explicit. Think again this process with regards to embryogenesis, right? So you have the seed coming in, the white seed coming in, and descending down and meeting with the ascending egg, right? Which is the earth function. It's the earth quality, and then the heaven quality is the seed. And what does the mother's body do? It literally manifests. It provides the flesh, the soil, just like the earth soil provides the nutrients and the body from which this new creation will emerge. You have this joining of heaven and earth at embryogenesis, at conception, and through the process of embryogenesis, you have this explication, this explicit, implicit process being played out in the process of creation. So lots of great, clear examples we can draw from thinking about these two qualities of heaven and earth. So more from a Bible quote: "You shall eat flesh in the evening and be filled with bread in the morning, and you shall know that I am your Lord. I am the Lord your God." Commentary: on the whole, the structure of this narrative is straightforward. It describes the nation of Israel as existing between heaven and earth to receive the knowledge of God from their union. In general, the process of knowledge should always be interpreted in terms of two opposite transactions. It always involves materialization of meaning from above in exchange for refinement of matter from below. These exchanges of spirit and flesh are the two sides of a single coin because invisible truth cannot be made manifest without material sustenance. As illustrated here, the descent of manna towards the earth is a process of materialization. This is clear in the Bible because manna is compared to hoarfrost, which is a solidification of dew, which is itself a condensation of air. Moreover, the process of making bread from manna represents the materialization at the human level. Indeed, making dough from flour, a fine white substance, symbolizes condensation, and making bread from dough symbolizes solidification. On the other hand, the ascent of quails into the camp and the preparation of their flesh is a process of refinement, where meat must be cleaned, tenderized, and cooked until suitable for human consumption. As will be demonstrated in later chapters, making bread and preparing meat are extremely significant in the Bible. They are important symbols of lowering meaning and raising matter for the union of heaven and earth at the human level. Now let's reflect a bit on this chapter here. So we have these two forces, heaven and earth, ascending and descending. From on high, you have the seed, the bread, the manna, which is to materialize the meaning, right? And then you have the quail, the flesh, which is to refine matter. So this materializing meaning and refining matter, when done appropriately, is the manifestation of knowledge of God through his creation. And we can think how this can go wrong, and we can think of ideas of kosher and eating some foods while not eating others. And in our time, we can think of something like the coronavirus, right? We could think of the coronavirus as a consequence of missing the mark, of sinning, right? If not acting appropriately with regards to animals, right? It either came from a wet market where you have people eating bats and eating animals that are not meant for consumption, right? So we can see what is true in a sense and what is right for humanity and for the earth by seeing the consequences of missing the mark. It's a hard way to learn. But if you consume the wrong animals, bats in this case, there will be a transfer and an influx of chaos, the coronavirus. So there's the right way to think about these two forces and to implement them in our life individually and collectively. All right, chapter 17 is Adam as mediator, naming animals and hosting angels. And you know what? It's going to get a little bit denser here, and when we get into more specific and particular examples from the Bible, but I think it's important to work through the difficulty to get what's going on here. So, Adam as mediator, naming animals and hosting angels. Quote, "These are the descendants of the heaven and the earth when they were created." Commentary, in the verse above, Adam is described as the descendant or offspring of heaven and earth. In the verses below, Adam is also described as the mediator or bridge that provides the necessary communication between heaven and earth. Another quote, "No herb of the field had sprung up, for God had not made it rain upon the earth, and there was no human to work the ground." Commentary, Adam's mediation between heaven and earth involves lowering meaning and raising matter. This cosmic process is symbolized in a variety of ways in the context of the Bible. For instance, Adam's first job in the Garden of Eden is to name the animals, which is a clear case of lowering heaven into the earth. In this scenario, heaven's wind becomes Adam's breath and serves as a vehicle to communicate between the spiritual and corporeal realities. With it, Adam is able to assign a spiritual identity to the animals of the world. Another interesting point with regards to forming identities. You got to remember from Genesis that Adam didn't create the animals, but he was enlisted in naming the animals. And these names weren't arbitrary. Lots to ponder here. More, Adam names the animals from Genesis 2:19. God formed from the ground every beast of the field and bird of the air. He brought them to the human to see what he would call them. Whatever Adam called each living creature was its name. Close quote. Language is what separates humans from animals in this cosmology. Adam is the only earthly creature capable of uniting spiritual principles and corporeal facts with language through his spirit or breath. Quote again from Psalms, "Who makes the winds his messengers, angels, and the flaming fire his ministers?" This is an interesting illustration here. As illustrated here, humanity's full role as cosmic mediator can be summed up as naming animals and hosting angels. In biblical cosmology, angels are messengers that transmit higher meaning and guidance to humanity. On the other hand, beasts can potentially receive guidance and instructions from humans. Naming the animals is the ultimate proof of Adam's God-given authority because it makes him the very source of their identity. As will be detailed in the following chapter, the role of Adam towards angels is to host them and feed them. And his role towards animals is to name them and eat from them. That being said, it is now important to understand that eating and naming are closely related in biblical cosmology. They are both examples of putting matter under the influence of your spiritual authority. Thus, naming, eating, and taming the animals are connected in meaning, and so are hosting, feeding, and following the angels. Another important way to symbolize these relationships is through the interactions of a rider and a mount. The rider informs the mount with direction and purpose, and the mount expresses that purpose with power and support. The mount extends the rider's body by increasing the power of his legs, and the rider extends the mount's spirit by increasing its wisdom. What comes to mind quickly is Marshall McLuhan's understanding media as extensions of man, right? So in this sense, the mount extends the rider's body by increasing the power of its legs. But what's missing in our current epistemology is the flip side, and the rider extends the mount's spirit by increasing its wisdom. So as man is extending his faculties, there's also a reciprocal refining of spirit or a manifestation of meaning that is happening. So to close out the chapter, the relationship between the rider and the mount is perfectly analogous to the relationship between Adam's own mind and body. In this case, the body is his animal component and the mind is his spiritual component. Thus, Adam's impetus in the universe may also be described as raising the animal and lowering the spiritual, both in himself and the world around him. All right, I change the angle a little bit here because we have the sun coming down behind me. So I'm probably going to get through a chapter or two more, and that'll be it for this installment. So chapter 18, example, is entitled Example, Abraham as Mediator. As mediator I. So quote, "The Lord appeared to him, Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, and 3 men stood before him." Close quote. The example provided in this chapter is a rather clear account of humanity's role as mediator between heaven and earth. It describes Abraham and Sarah as the host and feed messengers, or angels from God. The reader may refer to Genesis 18, 1 through 10 for the full text of the narrative paraphrased below. Hosting angels and raising animals from Genesis 18, quote, "The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, and Abraham lifted his eyes and looked. 3 men stood before him, and he ran to meet them and bowed down to the earth. Abraham says, 'Please do not move on. I will fetch a morsel of bread and sustain your heart.' Abraham said to Sarah in the tent, quote, 'Take 3 measures of fine meal and knead it, and then make some cakes.' Abraham went to the herd and chose a calf, and then he gave it to the youth who hurried to prepare it. He took cream and milk and the calf he prepared, and he offered it to them under the tree." Footnote, the tree represents the spatial axis, which was briefly mentioned in the first section of this commentary and will be fully discussed in sections 4 and 5. Back to the text. "They said to him, 'Where is Sarah, your wife?' Abraham said, 'Behold, in the tent.' The Lord said, 'I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son.'" Into the commentary here. This story is one of many examples in the Bible of a transaction between heaven and earth. In this case, Abraham receives heavenly information from angels in exchange for earthly food from animals. In other words, this transaction is an exchange of seed for flesh, like the descending manna and ascending quails from the previous chapter. Again, quote, "I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Commentary, the information transmitted to Abraham by the messengers came in the form of a simple promise. This promise is a clear example of a seed because it contains great implications with very little basis in the material reality. Also, the promise informs Abraham of a future son, which makes it a perfect example of a seed. What is a seed but the promise of a future offspring? As illustrated in the following diagram, the diagram here, Abraham finds himself at the center of a cosmic transaction between heaven and earth. This is a typical example of trading flesh for seed to acquire knowledge. Footnote, a clear example of trading flesh for seed can also be found in the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, when Jack trades his cow for magic beans. Back to the text here. On one side, Abraham asks a youth to prepare flesh. On the other, he asks Sarah to make bread. As discussed in chapter 16, making bread from flour is a process of materialization, whereas preparing meat from an animal is a process of refining. Again, we're having more examples and expressions of these two fundamental processes, this process of materialization and this process of refinement. Quote, "Abraham went to the herd and chose a calf, and then he gave it to the youth who hurried to prepare it." Commentary, the image of raising livestock in this story is significant because it points to the role of humanity as, quote, "raising the animal to lower the spiritual," end quote. In particular, the act of choosing a calf, emphasis on choosing, indicates a process of refinement and of separating the cream from the common. Moreover, the flesh of the animal must be cooked to become the body of these heavenly messengers. This is also a process of refinement. Back to the quote, "Abraham said to Sarah in the tent, 'Take 3 measures of fine meal and knead it, and then make some cakes.'" Commentary, the image of making bread in this story indicates a process of vulgarization. It means that something too fine, flour, has been materialized into something more tangible, bread. Importantly, the bread prepared by Sarah in this story is not even eaten by the angels. This odd omission may seem like a mistake, but it is actually a typical pattern in biblical cosmology. The ascending side of the transaction, the flesh, must be consumed by the angels, while the descending side, the bread, remains intact. These are simply two sides of a single coin. One side feeds, the other side hosts. One side feeds, the other side hosts. As strange as these cosmic transactions may appear to modern interpreters, they are no different than what any individual performs on a daily basis. Humans refine matter into food to be integrated by the head into the body. This body is then able to host and support the human spirit, which is thereby able to manifest itself concretely in the world. Thus, matter is refined so that the spirit can be materialized and vice versa. The only difference here is that the transaction is performed at the cosmic level, with Abraham playing the role of mediator between spirit and matter. We read this part too because it's an important insight to grasp here. It says, humans refine matter into food to be integrated by the head into the body. Right? So you can see the interplay between heaven and earth. Right? The head chooses to the appropriate food and the appropriate matter of preparation, and then prepares the food, and then informs the body. It literally takes in the food and provides information to the body, and then the body, if done appropriately, supports the head and helps it navigate through the world. You can think of this in a very practical way of if you eat the wrong foods all the time, if you are constantly eating processed and junk food, right? You are informing the body, you are creating an imbalance between heaven and earth, because you are choosing to provide the body with disinformation, in a sense. And doing so on a continual basis will lead to the disintegration of the body and the head. And we can think of this at the national level, right? We can think of this at so if a human individual eats eats food in order to inform its body, what would a nation eat in order to inform its body, right? Ultimately, the answer to that question is people, right? So you inform the body politic by bringing in people, and then people have distributed functions within the nation state, right? And those distributed functions support the system as a whole and keep the nation alive and well. We can use these insights to look at something like national policy, or the way that the government is doing their job, and use this simple principle to see, with regards, for example, to immigration, right? The question of who to bring in to the country, into the nation, into the body, right, should be used and utilized with discrimination. If you have open borders, for example, you're going to be taking in all types of nourishment that is deleterious and that is destructive to the body. Or if you don't take any in, right, you're literally not providing the new information, the sustenance for the nation state to continue and thrive. So there needs to be this balance in this discrimination in terms of who enters the country, who enters the nation. But again, this can be and has been corrupted, where there are ulterior motives for bringing in certain groups or leaving certain groups out of the country. So it's not simple, but it's not to throw away these ideas or to disregard them just because human beings happen to be corrupt. And why they're corrupt and how they're corrupt is, I think, time for a discussion at another time here. But that's the end of chapter 18. I think I'm going to leave it there. Actually, let me see if I can do one more here for you. Okay, yeah, we'll do chapter 19, and then we'll close out there. All right, this next chapter, 19, it's going to get into kind of biblical conceptions of gender, of male and female, which there is a lot of confusion and disinformation, misinformation around this topic. And this will give us a good insight into these ideas. So chapter 19, Sexuality as Microcosm, Adam's Reproduction. Quote, God created the human in his image. In the image of God, he created male, heaven, and female earth he created him. Commentary. The sexual revolution has been just as devastating to the spiritual worldview as the Copernican revolution. Therefore, if we wish to understand certain notions in the Bible, we must adopt a traditional perspective and forget about things like test tube babies and gender reassignments. Instead, we must simply recognize the duality of male and female as the basis of procreation. Only from this natural position does sexuality become a microcosmic union of heaven and earth. Footnote, only the symbolism of male and female as principles of reproduction are discussed here. More complete picture is given in chapters 71 and 72. In biblical cosmology, heaven and earth is the secondary cause of all manifestation. It is also the basic pattern from which all of reality was modeled, including the male and female duality in the context of procreation. Quote from Genesis 2:21. God made the human fall asleep and took one of its sides and then closed the flesh in its place. God built the side he had taken from the human into a woman and brought her to the human. Human, this time it is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. This shall be called woman, because this was taken away from man. Thus a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his woman, and they shall become one flesh. Again, ideas of marriage under the church and what that signifies in terms of this epistemology here, right? Marriage is the union of heaven and earth, and they quite literally become one body, one unified body. We got to think of bodies in a different way, and this is kind of part of getting us to think like that. So the commentary, as illustrated in the previous page, Adam is the higher principle at the source of gender division. Footnote, the name Adam actually means human and refers to both male and female halves. God created Adam in the image of God. He created them male and female, blessed them, and called their name Adam. That's from Genesis 5 there. Therefore, like the creator of the universe, Adam can reproduce a miniature image of himself, a child, through the reunion of that polarity. Thus, in order to create Adam in his image, God made Adam a creator or reproducer of his own image. Only then was the microcosm truly complete, when the image contained its own image within itself. Again, think of this fractal process of generation, production, regeneration, and reproduction. Quote from Genesis 2:18, God said, "It is not good that the human is alone. I will make him a help as his opposite." It's an important part at the end there. I will make him a help as his opposite. To truly grasp the significance of gender in the Bible, it is important to understand that Adam is the union of heaven and earth at the cosmic level, and that this union translates into a sexual union at the human level. Therefore, the male and female sides each represent one half of the equation. The male is responsible for materializing meaning into seed, and the female is responsible for refining matter into food. Again, back to these two fundamental processes here. Footnote, there is traditionally a strong connection between digestion and gestation because the womb is associated with the belly. Therefore, the seed apparently develops where the mother's own food is being stored. There's this idea and this concept from Taoism and of the Dantian, the lower Dantian, which is the spiritual battery, the spiritual center of humanity. And this reminded me of this idea of the relationship between gestation and digestion, in a sense that life is literally created in this lower Dantian point. On one side of the equation, the Father produces the seed that implicitly contains the essence of humanity. Therefore, the role of the male is directly connected to heaven and language. On the other side of the equation, like the earth itself, the mother provides sustenance in the form of food. In particular, she raises food from her own body, first in the womb and then in the breast. At the moment of her union, the seed's meaning begins to inform the food, and the food's matter begins to flesh out the seed. The seed consumes the food, which turns it into the body that hosts its meaning. In general, eating food is a human version of informing matter, while hosting seed is a human version of supporting and expressing meaning. These are the two sides of a single coin, which means the male and female roles are equally important in this cosmology. And then a footnote. This cannot easily be reconciled with the scientific explanation of how things work at the molecular level. In this case, males and females contribute the same amount of information, DNA, while only females express it with matter. Hence, the male role is greatly diminished in a materialistic worldview. And let's see if I can put this diagram here to kind of drive things home. That is the end of chapter 19. All right, let's reflect a little bit on this last chapter here, as it touched on some very poignant ideas here in terms of sexuality, in terms of gender, and the biblical worldview. And just kind of thinking out loud, I am not against homosexuality. I'm not against transgender, any of that. Particularly, I think that you can have, and it's warranted to have, a understanding and a respect for these ideas, also looking at ideas of homosexuality as sin, for example, right? To say that to be a homosexual is to sin seems like an anathema. It seems like, why would we call somebody a sinner for being a homosexual? But remember what sin means. We can't just think of it at the individual level. We have to think of it at the collective level. You have to incorporate and consider both when thinking through this. So homosexuality, a homosexual is a person at the individual level that chooses or is driven by natural desire to have homosexual relations. Not a lot of consequence for humanity as a whole in terms of procreation. But if we think of it in terms of everybody sinning in that way, right, then procreation, according to these, in this worldview, cannot happen. That is the disintegration of the species. So to say that homosexuality is a sin, you have to also consider that, sleeping with someone's wife heterosexually is a sin, or watching pornography is a sin. Overindulging in any desire is actually a sin. So it's not singling out this particular situation, right? The idea is that we're all sinners. We all miss the mark, right? And the idea is to have this understanding of what it means to sin, and what it means to miss the mark, and what it means to have a change of heart, and to have a reconfiguration of one's intentions and desires towards God and towards doing the right thing, and doing the right thing in terms of speaking the truth, in terms of loving one's neighbor, and in terms of love the sinner, hate the sin, right? And it's not about judgment. You don't go around judging people for whatever particular sin they have. You don't go around not loving them. You don't go around casting aspersions, gossiping, like all these things that people do in the name of Christianity or in the name of the Ten Commandments or whatnot. They are wrong. They are mistaken. They are the cause of so much misery and suffering in this world. And then it also causes people to disregard the very valuable cultural and generational spiritual information that's found in Scripture. People, myself included, will not look into a text from which they think that bigotry is generated. The ideas of bigotry are taken from the Bible. And there's a lot of complications here that we're not going to get into here. But the idea is, to call something like homosexuality a sin is not any different than to call, stealing, or stealing someone's idea, or thinking bad about someone, or talking, gossiping about a neighbor. These are all ways that we miss the mark. And again, it comes back to what sin is, what it means to miss the mark. It has to do with human relationships, the thriving of human relationships, and the relationship between man and God. We're at a point now where the idea of there is a God that is that provided a kind of code in order to in order for human beings to thrive is such a hard stretch to make for most people, especially if they've had some terrible experiences with religion, or they've been inculcated and indoctrinated by our scientific and materialistic worldview. It's hard to get there to even consider these ideas and look at them without bias, in a sense. So I guess what I'm getting at here is, don't let the past conceptions of what a Christian is to you, or what a church is to you, or what a believer is by the ideas that we see in television and media and the experiences that we've had in the past, right? Because these are all manifestations of corruption of human beings, not of the source code. Now, this is my position right now. It could change, it could not, it could become more refined or whatever it may be. But I'm telling you what I genuinely think right now, and I am a very liberal-minded person that is compassionate and believe that should be the case for all of us, right? When it comes down to it, love your neighbor as yourself and love God with all your heart. It doesn't say love your neighbor if they are not sinners, or love your neighbor if they don't do X, Y, and Z, right? So it's this unconditional love that is at the bedrock here, that is the foundation of this worldview that Jesus taught. That has to be at the center when considering everything else. So anyways, just a little aside there to finish this part 2 of the language of creation. Next time we're going to finish out this chapter, this section of the book, and we'll go from there. So any feedback, appreciative. Again, appreciate you guys, and thanks for tuning in.